So I'm going to talk about myasthenia, uh, primarily the investigations and how do you work up a patient and what are the unusual presentations that we need to be wary of. So, like we said, like Savi said, the the one theme that all of these speakers will be touching upon is red flags because that's what we need to pick out. Cases that look simple but could be sinister. So myasthenia, we know, is an autoimmune disease that affects a neuromuscular junction. The cause for ptosis here is because the muscle which is supposed to lift the eyelid, which is the levator, has an issue with the neuromuscular junction between the branch of the third nerve that uh, gives the motor supply to the levator muscle. At the neuromuscular junction, there are antibodies that are against the anti-acetylcholine receptor. Now, we need to know that there is now growing evidence that to suggest that myasthenia, while it is a single spectrum, there are different endpoints on it, and ocular myasthenia and generalized myasthenia are, although connected on the same spectrum, there are a lot of patients who are seen to have exclusive myasthenia, ocular myasthenia gravis, and may not progress to systemic myasthenia gravis also, which normally is the rule. But one thing is that unilateral ptosis is the most common presenting sign in ocular myasthenia gravis. Now, there are four main diagnostic and clinical tests that we employ to diagnose or conclusively rule in or a diagnosis of myasthenia. These are ICE test, neostigmine test, anti-acetylcholine receptor antibodies, and electromyography or single fiber EMG. So as a rule, you should always check for myasthenia in all ptosis patients. By doing so, you will be able to pick out that rare case that comes, the wolf that wears the sheep's clothing. So one thing is a history of variability. Something that you need to know is that it's not always as per the book, which says diurnal variation, which means evening worsening of the disease, which means in the morning it's good, but in the evening it worsens. People's schedules are now different. People are, have lesser sleep pattern, different sleep patterns with less sleep at night, and it doesn't always follow the rule of more. It's better in the morning, worse in the evening. It can even be the other way. So if there is a history of variability, that should be enough, and don't always look for worsening in the evening. Ocular motility has to be checked every time. And if the patient complains of occasional diplopia, sometimes I see double vision. On few days I've seen double, but now I don't. That should be a red flag again. Different diagnosis previously. Someone else has diagnosed him as something else previously, and someone has diagnosed, you see the patient, and now a patient has been previously diagnosed as a lateral rectal palsy, but now the patient only has ptosis. That should be something that should worry. No diagnostic pattern. You see a restrictive, strabismus, but or there is, it doesn't fit into an A pattern, a V pattern, a DVD. It's something unusual. It doesn't fit into a third nerve, a sixth nerve. Atypical presentations. Ask for systemic history. If a patient oftentimes needs water to swallow morsels of food, that could be a sign that generalized myasthenia is already set in. Other things where they could complain of tiredness is walking, and while chewing, they need to take breaks between morsels. So, age Nobar, this is a 2-year-old girl who came with left eye ptosis. The parents, said that she's sleepy all the time, and she came with both the parents. She was diagnosed with congenital ptosis elsewhere and was advised of sling surgery. And then I asked her, we always ask for a history of to rule out myasthenia. And surprisingly, the father said the left eye is always droopy. The mother was categorical in saying, no, the right eye is also droopy. Both eyes are droopy. It's just that now you see the right eye looks a little normal. So I asked them to get some blood tests done, including the antibodies, and come back a week later. And a week later, you can see both eyes are total. So antibodies were positive, and the child also had a thymoma. Now, this is another patient, a 73-year-old male, who had a history of trauma on one side of the head, and the CT scan showed an undisplaced lateral wall of fracture, and visual acuity was 20/80, which could be attributable to cataract. There was ptosis. The patient complained of diplopia since the time of the trauma, and the patient had been diagnosed as traumatic optic neuropathy and a traumatic third nerve palsy, and was asked to observe. And the patient sought a second opinion. But if you look at the 9 gaze pics, this doesn't look like third nerve palsy because there is restriction limitation in all cases. The sixth nerve is partially limited. The medial adduction is partially limited. So this doesn't fit into a pattern. All we did was an ICE test. And when you check for motility, and I'll come to that a little later, you place the ice pack for 3 to 5 minutes and the motility had improved completely. So sometimes you can have different presentations. ICE test has a very high sensitivity and specificity. It, you need to you need to know that majority of the patients with ocular myasthenia gravis that present with ptosis will almost always have a positive ICE test. I'll quickly run through a short video on how to do the ICE test. So before you start the ice pack test, you need to document the patient's photograph and take measurements of the eyelid. So here you can see that the right eye has moderate ptosis, the left eye has severe ptosis. And then you place the ice pack on both the eyes, because as you can see, the ptosis is in both eyes. Now, two things you need to know. You do not keep the ice pack for longer than 2 minutes, because keeping it for longer than 2 minutes inhibits the natural contractility of the muscle. So even though you may have got a positive ice test at 2 minutes, but you've kept it for longer, so you may end up getting a false negative ice pack test. So keep it only for 2 minutes. You can keep it for a slightly longer period if you want to check for ocular motility. But for ptosis alone, 2 minutes should be good enough. Now, after 2 minutes, you take the ice packs off. And again, you need to take a photograph, document, and measure. And then you have a clear comparison in front of you. And you know that the ptosis has improved from 3 millimeters in the photograph above, which is before, to 8 millimeters in the photograph below, which is after. So you've got, after keeping an ice pack for 2 minutes, you've got a minimum of a 2 mm improvement, which is very, very typical of a positive ice test. And this is your minimum requirement for a positive ice test. Sometimes you may be on the fence, and those are what we call equivocal ice tests. Now, another test that you can also do to check for myasthenia is ask the patient to look up. And asking the patient to look up in sustained up gaze induces what is called fatigability, like Dr. Savri did in that patient. You can ask the patient to look in all gazes, or particularly keep looking upwards, and you will see that the ability of the patient to retain the eyelid in that position gradually worsens, and till a point that the patient is unable to keep his eye open. And this is classic fatigability, very, very pathognomonic of myasthenia. The other test that can be done is neostigmine test, but this is an invasive test. It has to be done in the operating room with an anesthetist on standby. It has a very high sensitivity, but most of the evidence that we have for the sensitivity of neostigmine test is from generalized myasthenia. Nothing is there for ocular myasthenia. Single fiber EMG, it's the most sensitive test for detecting abnormal neuromuscular transmission. Basically, the most sensitive test to detect any pathology in the neuromuscular junction. It has a high sensitivity in generalized myasthenia gravis, but when you use the frontalis or the orbicularis, it has a limited sensitivity in ocular myasthenia gravis, mainly because ocular myasthenia gravis affects the extraocular muscles and the levator, where it is not easy to introduce electrodes and check for single fiber EMG. The other thing is anti-acetylcholine receptor antibodies. This is a gold standard, which means if you have a positive antibodies test, there is no ambiguity about whether the patient has myasthenia or not. Only thing is that while generalized myasthenic patients may have 80 to 90% of these patients may have the antibodies, a significantly lesser proportion of ocular myasthenia patients have positive antibodies. So there is a lot of variety of testing and varying sensitivity. So we've come up with a nomogram to figure out which test needs to be done when we talk about myasthenia. So these are the different tests. And to understand what it is, so ICE test or sleep test have moderate sensitivity and high specificity for myasthenia. Fatigue test, like I mentioned, is highly specific. Antibodies is moderately sensitive but highly specific. And this similar, you have these parameters for repetitive nerve stimulation, EMG, and heterophonium. So in ocular myasthenia, what we've done is a study that we conducted. 37 patients of myasthenia who presented as unilateral ptosis were subjected to the 4 tests, which is single fiber EMG, acetylcholine antibodies, ICE test, and neostigmine test. ICE test was seen positive in 34 out of 37 patients. Neostigmine test was seen positive in 21 out of 37 patients. Single fiber EMG was seen in 22 out of 37, and antibodies were seen in only 17 out of 37 patients. So, in terms of the positive values, you can see the order was ICE test, single fiber EMG, neostigmine, and antibodies. But if in this cohort, the average age was about 46. So we split the group into two, below 46 or below 45 and above 45. And single fiber EMG was significantly higher in patients who were older than 45. So if you have a myasthenic suspect who is above 45, there's a good chance you may want to do single fiber EMG along with an ICE test rather than antibodies in order to get a higher diagnostic yield. And then the mean duration of symptoms in our group was 13 months. So we split it into two groups, less than 12 months symptoms and symptoms for more than 12 months. And here what we saw that patients who have longer disease tend to have positive outcome in neostigmine and antibodies. So age of the patient and duration are parameters that you may want to think about before ordering which investigation. Same is the case for diplopia. If the patient has had a history of diplopia, then single fiber EMG again gives a higher positivity rate. So because this has a lot of economic implications in a country like India. When you do the complete battery of tests, you are almost subjecting the patient to what is equivalent to the cost of a surgery. So you may want to not do a laundry list of tests and cherry pick which ones you want to do. So ICE test has the maximum diagnostic yield in predictive myasthenia across all ages, except in severe ptosis. In those with a history of ptosis for more than 12 months, antibodies and neostigmine may be useful. In patients older than 45 years and those with a history of diplopia, single fiber EMG tends to give higher positivity or diagnostic yield. And in patients with severe ptosis, your initial investigation should be an acetylcholine receptor antibody. So these factors of age, duration of symptom, and history of diplopia should be there in your mind. Now, what is the association of thymoma with myasthenia gravis? So if you see, more thymoma patients more generalized myasthenia patients have thymoma. So 14 to 22%, almost 1/4 of generalized myasthenics may have a thymoma, and less than 10% of ocular myasthenia gravis patients may have a thymoma. But remember, ocular myasthenia gravis can always progress to generalized myasthenia gravis, and the thymoma may be present even before generalized myasthenia gravis sets in. So you should always remember that thymoma is basically almost like a paraneoplastic syndrome that is seen in myasthenia gravis. Antibodies should be checked, and if the patient has antibodies, you may want to do a CT scan imaging to make sure that there is no thymoma. This is, I think, a little complex beyond the age or beyond the scope of our treatment of this presentation here. When I talk about therapy, I've limited my therapy only to one slide, mainly because I firmly believe while we can start medication, the follow-up and monitoring of myasthenia therapy has to be done in conjunction with a neurologist. Remember, neurologist is also a physician, and they are equipped to handle the side effects which medications of myasthenia can have. The first line is acetylcholinesterase receptors, which is pyridoxine, pyridostigmine, and along with that, we give a short course of corticosteroids, which may have to be extended. Remember, corticosteroids gives a favorable response in almost 85% of ocular myasthenia patients. Although complete remission is rare with corticosteroids alone, which is why it is combined with acetylcholine esterase inhibitors and maybe immunomodulators. Why do you want to start treatment early? Because steroid early in ocular myasthenia gravis can reduce the likelihood of progression to generalized myasthenia gravis. And it also reduces the proportion of patients who progress from ocular to generalized myasthenia gravis. There was a study that showed 36 to 83% of patients with ocular myasthenia gravis progressed to generalized myasthenia gravis when they were not given steroids, but only 7 to 17% of patients who received early corticosteroid therapy progressed to generalized myasthenia gravis. So without prednisolone, generalized myasthenia develops in up to 50% of 50% of ocular myasthenia gravis patients within 1 year. And finally, if you don't get a good response or suboptimal response, you may want to switch over to immunomodulators. So what have we learned? We've learned that there is no one single test to rule out myasthenia. Investigations can rule in or diagnose myasthenia, but a negative investigation or a negative clinical test doesn't rule out myasthenia. Ptosis and diplopia are the initial signs of the disease in over 50% of myasthenia patients, and up to 80% of these patients, if left untreated, can go on to develop generalized myasthenia. And in majority of the patients progressing to myasthenia, for ocular to generalized myasthenia will occur within the first 2 years after ocular symptoms begin if they are not treated. Early steroids may decrease progression. Gold standard is anti-acetylcholine receptor antibodies. If you have the antibodies, you have myasthenia. And in some cases where you don't have antibodies, but still the ptosis persists, response to therapy may be considered as a diagnostic sign of myasthenia gravis. CT chest should be done in all adults who present with myasthenia gravis who are test positive for antibodies while being investigated for myasthenia gravis. I think this is the same kid slide we already saw.